What we're gonna do now real quick, bringing power towers connected over here. I'm pretty much just gonna make a couple lines of them. Got some geysers here, another one there. Probably scan for a few more, see where they are. Place some of the generators there that utilize the geysers, the geothermals. Get some extra power going. Then while I'm down there, I'm gonna visit these radioactive pockets and get the hard drives and Mercer spheres out of the way, since we got our hazard suit on. So give me a few more spheres. Get that last upgrade for the MAM tree. All I gotta do is get the faster upload speed, and then we'll pretty much be done with the Mercer spheres, and then I can just make as many storage boxes as needed. Another thing I found out, or that I saw, is that with these guys, you can just crawl up to them and they won't release their little flies even after you hit them. This applies to those bigger ones as well, which is probably the greatest thing I found out that I learned about in quite a bit. And that includes anytime you're just holding C, whether jetpacking towards them, or as long as you're holding C, keep your legs up, and that makes you immune to alerting them. So we'll also take down some of those radioactive hogs with the rifle now that we can easily avoid them with our jetpack and whatnot. So slowly become our own apex predator. Those guys still scare the hell out of me. And don't get me started on the radioactive spiders, because those are out and about too. Alright, we're at one of our hard drive sites. I know on top is going to be one of those hogs that are irradiated. Oh, not those ones. Okay, just the plasma guys. Irradiated boys are all the way over there. But we can test the rifle. Not a pilot as well as the rebar, but long range. But 15 per mag. I know the turbo rifle has like 50 a mag. That wasn't so hard, was it? Oh, god damn. This has the radioactive hog on it. These guys are pains in the asses. Now I do want to keep using the hard drives, however part of me, I also want to save them, because the pool of recipes that you can unlock only count for like materials and stuff you unlock. I'm not going to get any alternates for any of the later game items and materials, but there are some aluminum ones that I'm going to want. I cut out some of the recipes. I come out some of the ingredients, like the needing quartz or coal and whatnot. It streamlines it a lot, so I want those. But I don't want to keep using them and just get more recipes for items that I don't need to make. your patronage. I think that was one. Damn. Now you'd probably be thinking, Vadkram, you have a whole bunch of healing items that you've been making. All those inhalers and berries that you've been picking. You'd be right. One thing, I always forget I have one. Two, I'm the type of guy who stores all the healing and important items. Like in Final Fantasy games, high potions, elixirs, super elixirs. I'll store those until the final boss and then never use them. You know, these get their power from the sun, so let's put them under a whole bunch of rocks. Oh yeah. It's so strange coming back to like places that I used in my previous save, because I was just coming through here and I didn't even recognize it at first before looking at it. But this is where I had my first coal generators, which I eventually converted to make a whole bunch of steel. I had a train station there and brought it up to where my main base was, but it kind of just shook me for a second. It's like, oh man, this is what it was like before I destroyed all the trees and all that fun stuff. I wish I would. Oh, wish I wasn't paused, but when I took out this summer sloop and those roots went down, the hog here was standing right on it, so I got pulled down by the root. Crazy. Bye-bye. The site of the first base. I always forget what it looks like after you pave everything over. Got my Mercer spheres and can finally get the upload upgrade. 240 a minute.
Dimensional upload speed increased. Every particle now has encoded potential reconstruction memory for when any part using that particle is recalled, enabling instancing on the fundamental particle level.
You grow shifted the body chord flow cycle song of the 6th layer. Harmonious. Your cycle songs will only deepen the layers.
I'm always working on myself. The time will come.
More sheets from the HDDs means we can just skip right ahead to Logistics Mark 5.
Milestone reached. Fixit dedicated this milestone to the conveyor belt and lift Mark 5. They may be implying that your factory could be further optimized. While they are correct, I believe they are setting unreasonable expectations. Having all of humanity very definitely relying on your work is a lot of pressure. It's a good thing I'm here.
Alright, our closest bauxite to get aluminum started is going to be Pure Node up on that ridge there. As you can see, probably going to divert power station and lead myself up there. And it's going to connect it to that power station we have up there that we started from our earlier escapades. So it'll be a good little network of zip lines going around in case I needed to go to different pathways. So I'll probably start the bauxite up there, lead it down here, because we're gonna need water as well. So I'll probably put a factory down there somewhere. I think I'm still waiting for one of the recipes that I need to get for pure bauxite, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I was about to bring it up. One of the last recipes that we needed was the pure aluminum, where instead of needing scrap and silica to make the ingots, it just needs straight ingots. It makes a little less, but not having to source quartz or worry about that Makes things a little easier. Whoa. Locals. And there they go. And one of our other recipes involves, usually the main recipe for aluminum scrap involves coal, and our closest coal node is probably somewhere over here. Probably somewhere over here. There we go. That's our closest. However, one of the alternates that we have involves, instead of coke, instead of coal, use petroleum coke. So, given that, I can probably overclock one of the oil nodes there to power more of those refineries, and then use any excess from one of the other ones, overclock as needed, to make the amount of petroleum coke that we need. Because it'll be coal, it'll be the oil, change that to the petroleum coke, will be changed straight into heavy oil residue, which will then be made straight into the petroleum coke and fed into another refinery, which will make the scrap when mixed with alumina solution. So tons of refineries are going to be needed. I'll just have to conveyor all that stuff down there. Then it'll probably join the rest of the stuff in the pure... I gotta think if it would be best to just put the ingots in there, or probably have my aluminum factory, which makes the that's a good question as well. You need copper to make the sheets, but not the aluminum casings. It might be best to load the ingots in there, transport those, and divert the ingots away to a separate factory close to the base, which will utilize one of the copper nodes around. So, final plan: bury the bauxite to the plan, to this plant here, get some refineries going, get some heavy oil residue into petroleum coke, mix that with the aluminum solution, which will output our aluminum scraps, get a bunch of smelters, makes ingots, transport ingots, and then make our casings and sheets close to the base. Then we have aluminum. So this is what our plan is going to be for aluminum. Everyone knows the Satisfactory calculator. Pretty much put in your inputs off to the side. You can choose which alternate recipes you want to use, how much you want as a total output, and then it calculates pretty much what you need. So I pretty much put in our 60 and 120, doubling the initial output, and luckily that gives us straight 240. Our Mark II miner on a pure node gives us that 240, so pretty much this is what we have to work with, and all. So, and this display is what we're gonna need. So we need just one refinery, overclock that a little bit, so it makes let's see, around 288 meters cubed a minute, as well as feeding it water from the extractor. Another overclocked refinery, which is going to make our aluminum scrap, and that is going to also output water, and it's going to recycle back into that refinery. So it's gonna, and that's what I had trouble with first time, because one thing would get clogged up and it would stop the whole thing, and it was a lot of weird balancing that needed to be done. Our oil is going to make straight heavy oil residue. It doesn't look like I'll need that much anyway, so I could probably just overclock one of them a little bit to make that much. Get our oil residue, I'll just feed the resin back into the sink we have at our plastic plant, And then our petroleum coke is going to get mixed in with our aluminum, and that's going to create our aluminum scrap at 480. We're going to need 8 smelters or 4 double overclocked smelters to make our ingots, which are going to be transported back to our base, where we're going to have constructors and assemblers, and then going to overclock some of our copper and divert some of that to mix to make our sheets. And that's pretty much it. Really, the biggest thing is just the layout and getting the balancing for this water out. So hopefully it won't give us too much of a hassle. It's just really going to be the layout of the machines. We have plenty of power to work with. So we're at 6,700 and we're only at 27. A lot of our stuff is filled up, but if everything was on, it's 38. But we have a lot more than what we need, and especially once I divert some coal and sulfur over this way, convert those generators to turbo fuel. It's gonna be crazy. Well, we're gonna have so much energy, is gonna be ridiculous. And then of course they added rocket fuel and then that ionized fuel, which I can't even imagine how many fuel generators that's gonna power up. But that ain't gonna be for a long while. First steps first. So like I said, I'm gonna throw that over there, get things set up, and you'll see me in a little bit. Alright, this is our finished little factory. Some of the wires aren't too neat, but that can always be switched and updated. I just want to get things started before things get beautiful. Water extractor. We got a bunch of refineries. This one making the solution, and this one making the scraps. Heavy oil residue into petroleum coke. And that's making the ingots. That's getting sent to our truck stop. Byproduct of the silica just gets sent to the sink with everything else. One of the difficulties of this is the right balance, because everything's clocked correctly. However, with some of how the fluid works, and of course I'm no expert on how exactly it performs, I just know how it's going right now is the alumina solution feeds into this. Water is coming from the extractor as well as it being a byproduct of the aluminum scrap. So the byproduct water and the extracted water converge into here. However, at some point, and it's on my, I'll have to keep coming back and checking, possibly unless it's equaled out now, is that something fills up first, whether it's the alumina solution or the water here. Something gets filled up, and that causes one of these to idle for a second or two. And every time I try to flush it, try to get things equal out, one thing flows into another, it'll start back up, but after that 2-second buffer period, and during that time something will fill up again, causing backflow. I think now I have it to where it's using up everything perfectly without all the stuff that's in the pipe rushing into it, going it too quickly. But I'll just have to pay attention. At some point I'll probably realize, oh, why aren't my sheets and casings getting made, and then I'll have to come back here and try and figure it out. What I pretty much did at first was just just flush a pipe segment once or twice. First I did the water, and then I did the alumina, and I did that once or twice so all this flows into one of the machines enough to where it doesn't want to stop because it didn't have the correct amount, and eliminated that buffer. So honestly, just kind of got lucky with the amount of flushes on just one of these pipe networks each. Anyways, got a steady flow of 240 aluminum ingots. I'll show you where I put the factory. And would you look at that? Utilize this smart splitter, which had one extra output, split to one double clocked constructor and one double clocked assembler, making our sheets and casings. If you will recall, this copper for the computers only needed 20 ingots out of an underclocked copper node. And there's still one or two extra nodes here, but plenty of headroom for copper ore to be split. Now all the extra copper ore, which I split from there, goes for the casings, and now simple thing of copper all in one nice space. I know my last build, the computer thing was back when it was the old recipe, had its own huge factory, and then the sheets and stuff were close to the base. Everything was a lot more spread out, but being able to utilize this space so conveniently, feel super big brained. Makes me feel smarter than I actually am. But all that feeds up and over back into the truck stop. And of course has its own space, as well as already, because of all our extra Mercer spheres, gets uploaded to the depot. So I don't think the first shipment has come yet, but it's on its way. So that's sheets taken care of. Now I can just focus on unlocking those next tiers, getting started on that first part. Oh, what is that? Okay, I see a problem. Okay, it seems some of the overflow from these wants to backflow, wants to cut corners and go there. So I might have to switch this to a smart splitter. Overflow. That's why I gotta pay attention. So I gotta just figure out. I'll probably just make another splitter. I'll probably have to make another splitter if I have to, just to force the aluminum ingots to go that way. So here's a good explanation, I would say, for why it would be better to have these 4 rather than just the 2. The output of the smelters puts out 240 ingots. Obviously 240 can't be split well between the 2, which have a max capacity of 100 ingots. Obviously you can against 4. So they'll always have an extra space in each of their inventories to make everything without overflowing over there. So I don't think I'll have to worry about overflow and wasted ingots for quite a while. There we go.
Milestone reached. Several parts more efficient and powerful than the human brain can now be made to compensate for many deficiencies otherwise encountered in future development efforts. The blender enables you to mix and/or combine parts and fluids for more complex recipes. Most importantly, project part number 6, the assembly director system, should be produced and delivered to the space elevator as soon as possible.
Alright, we should get supercomputers a line of supercomputers done before anything. I'll need at least 500 supercomputers, or if we use the summer sloops, probably like 250. And those comes in stacks of 50, same as the regular computers. As well as creating these guys. The big part from the last phase. What are these gonna need? Computers. So we're gonna have to start branching out a lot more to get this stuff done, especially with plastic and Caterium being a lot more sparse. But now I have to play with some of the alternate recipes, see what the best is. I know it's gonna be a lot more fun getting these radio control units, because we'll want a stack of those, because those you use drones for, as well as some of the other ship parts, and then more parts that combine the control units and supercomputers together for like the heat sinks and the cooling units. So yeah, because I never even I made magnetic control rods, but I never delved into nuclear power before. Ah shit, I'm seeing ingots. That's no bueno. I go back and see what the problem is. Oh. I see. I didn't even hook up those to the mergers. I feel like a silly willy. Okay, I think I got some figured out. Diverted, luckily, I'm happy there was perfect enough space, but diverted into a storage container, which is going to act as a little buffer, and that's going to feed into the rest of it. So while everything's while the truck is traveling, doing its thing, getting the amount that it needs, all of this is gonna allow these to use up all the ingots that are provided, hopefully by the time it makes its round. One thing you'll really want to do when you start upgrading your belts is to go over the entire line, because usually your belts aren't just one belt, there's several increments, like something like this. That's a Mark IV belt. If I hadn't looked at the slowdown, this would be pretty much the thing that slows down the rest of the line. So you just gotta replace that part, then the rest will be just fine. So when you're going through, look at both ends of the conveyor belt, or just replace the whole thing and do it and then redo it as one belt. Alright, kit stuff is over. It's usually at this point where I hit quite a brick wall when it comes to thought processing and production and whatnot. So now we have to deal with getting radio control units and the supercomputers. In my last save, I was able to build a pretty large factory, making supercomputers, the cooling units, radio control units, all in the one thing, because one of the alternate recipes for supercomputers involves mixing it with the radio control units and the cooling systems. However, I don't really want to do that again for my own sake. And as I said, it's quite a wall because all these take so many different materials, and when you're just using the basic output of them, everything is split into their own 1.5, 3, a lot of stuff, and then a lot of the materials get split between all these different all the different buildings for the other materials. And with how spread out your factory is. Like for example, if you're gonna build like the turbo motors over here and that uses some buildings, and then you build the radio control units over here and mixing all that stuff. Some of the buildings for the turbo motors can produce some of the items for the buildings of the turbo motors, so you need to split those and bring those over there. Or at least that's what I'm thinking, and that's where it kind of becomes a bit overwhelming for me, because I need to plan how to split all this. But I decided I just want to keep it simple stupid, as the saying goes, and just make one thing at a time, starting with the supercomputer. Now at that point it's just playing with like the alternate recipes for some of the ingredients to the different components, and seeing what has the lowest energy the lowest energy output. So some with this supercomputer recipe uses electromagnetic control rods, which I'll also want to divert into storing for other purposes. But it's just a matter of like getting the materials and linking them up in a good way and splitting them, and at some point when I'm building all the other stuff, seeing as like obviously these aren't maxed out, somehow splitting those to be used for the other factories, because I've spent already a couple hours just kind of sitting here not even doing anything and thinking about how I'm going to plan all this stuff out. I mean, I did it last time, somehow managed, and that's when I built all my train lines to really just carry max loads of all these different materials to the different places. But first, before we get all that into that, a few things I want to unlock. I built a bunch of the radio control units and computers by hand just so I can unlock some of these, because I want to unlock some of these to get some of their alternate recipes, and then we'll be able to go from there. So first things we'll get is the drones out of the way.
Milestone reached. Drones provide automated low-capacity aerial transport between drone stations. Stations need to be supplied with any kind of fuel for the drones to function. Fixit had several restrictions in place prohibiting creative use of drones. I have since removed those because I think no pioneer would ever misuse Fixit property right under their noses. Especially since everything is recorded.
Drones have they have like 9 inventory spots, so they're good for transporting finished products along certain longer distances, since obviously you won't have stacks and stacks of a lot of these things. That's when you want to use drones to transport them to and fro. And then I also have to figure out the best way to utilize those, on what materials would be best to get transported, because although I could build a whole bunch of those to transport to and from different factories, each one of those takes 100 megawatts of power. So there's a lot of figuring out with the best way to use the drones to transport either finished products or intermediary products like rotors and motors and whatnot to different places. So got to get train stuff loaded up with a lot of basic materials to make full use of those larger inventory spaces. Then of course, pre 1.0 the drones only used batteries for fuel, but now they can use any of the packaged liquid fuel around. But I feel like it'd be best to set up one factory that just puts out a whole bunch of batteries and use that as like a main drone port to feed all the other drone ports that I could be making. I don't know.
Milestone reached. The nuclear power plant produces dangerous radioactive nuclear waste. Fixit reminds you that any extra limbs resulting from exposure to radiation are also contracted to work on project assembly. Fixit also reminds you that willful exposure to radiation will not result in any bonuses regardless of how many functional limbs it produces. Project part number 7, the magnetic field generator, should enter production as soon as possible. Any unnecessary delays will be noted. Milestone reached. The resource well pressurizer and extractor can harvest nitrogen, crude oil, and water from underground wells. Nitrogen, being a gas, does not need pumps for pipeline transportation. Fixit does not process most of your metrics, but I do. According to Fixit predictions, you are exploiting this planet with unexpected efficiency. They did always struggle to see the true potential of things. Nothing about you is unexpected to me, and therefore you are performing exactly as expected.
Anyways, with that, I should be able to get a few more of those alternate recipes. In the meantime, I figured it was easy enough. I can get started on the magnetic field generators for the space elevator, since both of these are easily made by themselves. With the first ship part there needs supercomputers, which take a lot more steps to assemble yourself, but it could be done. The magnetic field generator only takes 2 parts that are easily created, and I have plenty of spare parts for both of them. And then I'll just use this one to create a whole bunch of extra electromagnetic. Oh, game crashed. That's new. Like I was saying, gonna have this summer sloop to build extra, and those are just gonna be stored there. And I have a few extra storage areas that I'm gonna be using, that I created for some of the extra late game stuff. But I'll let that fill up with its own stuff, and I'll transfer it over myself. And then, of course, everything's building their own thing. So, all good. Now I can get started on production for the supercomputers. I can quickly demonstrate the hover pack. Uses 100 megawatts when you're using it. Replace it where the jetpack is. Pretty much it's used mostly for factory building. It'll connect to any live power source, whether it's a building or a power pole. And all it is, you just float. So it's good for when you're just placing down stuff all around. You don't have to keep jumping and moving around stuff. Get pretty high, and you see on the bottom left, that's how much reserve energy it has. So you can get pretty high. It also extends your reach of where you can place buildings down, so it's very handy for long distance factory building. As you'll notice, I finished our magnetic field generators for the space parts. Easy enough to make. It was super quick. Built a few extras because I'm sure they're going to be used in some of the next space parts. So that's still going. I made a whole bunch of the fuse modular frames, as well as a bunch of supercomputers. That is so I can quickly unlock the turbo motor as well as the Mark III miners. I'll explain in just a moment.
The Miner Mark III provides top-of-the-line resource extraction potential, making it even easier to contribute to project assembly. Project part number 8, the thermal propulsion rocket, is the most complex project part of this phase as it requires turbo motors and thus requires your best. Fixit didn't think pioneers such as you could get this far. I am glad we have both proven them wrong.
I still remember the days of the short bus. Anyways, so now that we have that, production, Miner Mark III, 3 turbo motors, fuse modulars, supercomputers. At least I have enough for a couple, which is great. Those are going to be very helpful, and I'll explain why. So, I decide to do it. I figured once I get everything in its own divided place, this will be a lot more manageable. 'Cause I get afraid just looking at this. Spend some time going through all the different materials that are going to be used for these recipes and kind of messing with what the best alternate recipes will be. That is because the plan is to create supercomputers, fuse modular frames, turbo motors, as well as cooling devices, all in one giant mega factory. The reason I wanted to unlock turbo motors is because, if you'll see, well, part of why I wanted super turbo motors, as well as like sharing some of the materials with some of this other stuff. The supercomputer recipe OC supercomputer uses the radio control units and cooling system, which I'll make as well as the ingredients for the supercomputers as well as on their own. And of course all this stuff is going to be summer sloops, so I'm going to have double outputs for those, most for these other ingredients and most for these other ingredients, as well as extras for storage for later use. So the biggest thing that I was keeping in mind when I was going through all this, and I'm sure there's still a little more that can be done, but I'll probably keep it as is mostly the power output. So at first it was like 5,000 megawatts, give or take, and I could have gotten it down to a little under 3,000 in the mid to high 2,500 range. But one thing I figured I would keep in mind is the burden on like how much output I need from each resource, being copper, oil, iron, deuterium, quartz. Because even though some of the recipes allowed for less power to be used, some of the burden on needing like 600 or 700 iron ore or a whole bunch of crude oil was a lot more than I would want to do. So in order to have less outputs for some of these recipes, I'll trade off with a lot of power. And one thing that I won't have to worry about at some point, I'm going to start with oil, is all this heavy oil residue. Because that's mostly going to be used for petroleum coke, and all this is going to be rubber for a lot of these recipes. I can use all this extra heavy oil residue, which will be like 140 meters cubed. I can just make a whole bunch more fuel generators using the fuel recipe that uses the heavy oil residue, and that'll give me several thousand more fuels to work with, especially when I start turning that into turbo fuel and rocket fuel later on down the road. One of my biggest issues with just how I play games in general is trying to do as much in as little space as possible, like not fully grasping that there's an entire continent of nodes and resource nodes to utilize. I want to be able to use as much as I can with as few nodes as possible, and I feel like if I use all of a sulfur node, I won't be able to utilize it as well as I can. I don't know, but I'll figure it out. But pretty much the plan is going to be just maxing out all the inputs that I need, getting those on trains, transporting them somewhere convenient, and then making one big old building that makes all this stuff. And that's how we'll complete our phase 4. And then I'll somehow figure out what we need to do for phase 5 when we get into the quantum stuff. But that's the plan, and I'm going to stick with it.